Hello there, I welcome you to the Unity Prior Knowledge video and Changes in Life Systems. That's what this title is called for this topic. You're going to be realizing this topic 1, which is chapter 1, we're going to be dealing with the biosphere. And now keep in mind, what does bio and sphere mean? And that would help to actually answer that. First, we have to look at ecology, what that's all about. Now keep in mind, ecology is the study of how organisms interact with one another. And not just that, it also dealing with their physical environment. So we are also going to look at how abiotic and biotic play a factor with ecosystems. And then go further and look at how communities, populations, and individuals also occupy them on a normal basis and what the relationship is between them. Then we'll also look at what a species is. And some organisms look very similar to one another, yet are characterized as different species. So for example, the dog, wolf, coyote, the jackal, and fox are all different, but they are very similar to each other, with the tails to the ears and so forth. Then we'll look at how other organisms look very different from one another, yet are characterized as the same species. Like, as we know, the canine is a prime example of that, from very small pups and to all very, very big dogs and so forth. So now we could actually define what a species is, dealing with a group of organisms that can be successfully bred with one another to produce fertile offspring. So, prime example, a horse and a donkey can mate and produce a mule, but a mule can't reproduce after that because of the chromosomes and so forth. Don't have to go more in details of that, but just giving you heads up on that. A mule won't be able to produce, so hence the fact a mule is not considered to be a species. So then we'll look at symbiotic relationships. Keep in mind, we talked about this back in grade 7 and grade 9 science classes in bio, and if you take on bio 20, you have also might have seen this concept too. And you will realize the three kinds of symbiotic relationships: mutualism, communalism, and parasitism, all related to how they could actually harm others, and some actually have no harm at all or doesn't do benefit to the other, which will go more in detail, of course, in the course. And you'll realize that a mutualism, a symbiotic relationship with both organisms benefit. Hence, the flower is pollinating from the bee. Of course, both are benefiting because the flower keeps growing from the pollination. Compared to parasitism, a symbiotic relationship in which one organism benefits at the cost of another, hence a mosquito is benefiting because it's taking the blood of any mammal. And of course, from there, what's going to happen is that you're going to find that the mammal who had no choice to accept the pain is the one that's not benefiting. In communalism, of the symbiotic relationship in which one organ benefits while the other receives neither benefits nor harms, a clownfish is a great example of that for regarding that. So then we'll actually look at predator-prey relationships. Prime example, the snowshoe hare to the lynx, and the one in the red is the lynx, and how they usually spike when there's a big spike of the snowshoe hare that's in the population. So this is important for keeping the community at a balance, and populations are kept in balance through these interactions. So then we'll look at the trophic levels. Keep in mind the trophic levels dealing with like a food chain happening here, where it summarizes what eats what, and it also explains how much energy is being done in food pyramids, which we'll look at after. So keep in mind the first trophic level, like in this primary trophic level, considered to be plants or in the surface of the earth, compared to in the sea, phytoplankton is an example of that. And which are also known as the autotrophs, just giving you a heads up for that. All remaining trophic levels consist of different types of consumers, animals, which are also known as the heterotrophics. So decomposers may feed at any of the trophic levels. Matters how they get decomposed and so forth. These, or maybe even the waste that comes from the eating that happens throughout these animals. Then we'll look at food chains, as I was mentioning. Most energy usually occurs at the top, where it just starts creating, and then you start losing efficiency from each part of what's being added, and so forth. In the end, the least amount of energy does occur from the hawk. Okay, energy conversions occur every time an organism is consumed. So keep in mind, that's what I was just mentioning. Its energy is converted to usable forms through the process of cellular respiration, which is a great thing that we have to look at throughout this topic. And as a result, there is less energy available for organisms at higher trophic levels. And this explains why there are often fewer large predators in ecosystems than producers or primary consumers. Hence the fact you don't find a lot of organisms eat snakes, but the ones that do, there's only very limited compared to what snakes eat. There's a lot more. So then we can actually look how complicated they could get with a food web. Now keep in mind, a food web just shows all the relationships that can occur, and that helps to actually understand that the arrowhead is representing what's going to be eating. So the other seals will be eating the krill, or the other birds will eat the krill or the fish, or the other herbivores like the squid will eat the krill too. So hence the fact that the arrowheads are representing that. Allows for more comprehensive understanding of how energy transfer through an ecosystem. This is why we do food webs. You just have to be patient of understanding how they work. Usually we like to have the primary right at the bottom and then work our way up to the other levels, as we said earlier. So bioaccumulation is another concept we'll look at, another grade 9 terminology where whatever happens from one organism, and if they were contaminated with any toxins, can be accumulated from the next organism, and so forth. And usually the highest level of the trophic level, like a predator and so forth, they are the ones who are going to get more of the dangers of the toxins that the other organisms received because they eat um, a lot of those organisms, and it just accumulates. Hence the fact it says accumulation in bio. So is the buildup of toxins in the tissues of organisms. So large predators or organisms who eat at higher trophic levels often contain a higher concentration, as I mentioned. So then we can actually look at the ecological pyramids, and in that there's three kinds. There's a pyramid of numbers, biomass, and energy. We'll go more in detail of the course for this. This is a new topic for this course. Then we'll look at a review of the hydrologic cycle, which is the water cycle, which you know that the water does play a big factor from land to the sky and the atmosphere to the oceans and so forth. And it involves this whole evaporation, condensation, and precipitation, even from runoff and transpiration of water. Then we will most important cycle because water is responsible for dissolving and transporting other nutrients. And this is why we have to look at the water cycle. And then we'll look at the carbon cycle, might be new for you, where it deals with this whole fact of how anything that's living has carbon. So it does play a factor of how to show cellular respiration and photosynthesis from plants and how that helps. And this is why it's good understanding of how the carbon cycle plays with the photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Then we'll also look at how carbon sinks occurs through this process. If you've never heard of that word before, we'll look more into the course, and that will help to understand the carbon cycle. We still have another cycle to look at, which is the nitrogen cycle. Now, in the nitrogen cycle, the plants and animals require nitrogen for normal cell functioning. So, what happens in this is that the majority of our atmosphere is composed of nitrogen, and then from there we can actually direct it to the atmosphere N2, which helps us to actually bring it back to the surface where plants and animals will need it to live. So nitrogen fixing is the bacteria in the soil required to cycle this atmospheric nitrogen into nitrates. Nitrates is an NO3 negative. Keep in mind, we've talked about this in chemistry section of the Unit A of how nitrates play a factor to plants. So denitrifying is bacteria in the soil, then return nitrogen back into the air. So a great concept that you have to go through because the nitrogen cycle is needed. So then we have to look at how species at risk. So this is like animals almost at the endangered side of things to extinction. And keep in mind, extinction is when there's no more. So that means animals that can't come back to life or any sorts because that species got eliminated. So the current extinction rate is about 100 times higher, my apologies, 1,000 times higher than the previous rates of extinction, averaging the loss of dozens of species every day. Why is that? That's a big issue that we'll look at. They believe it's climate change, population overhunting, habitat destruction, the introduction of invasive species, and so forth. So this is one of these are several reasons why it's happening. And this diagram is showing you how climate change has been changing over the years, where there is less heat. The red is just representing how much heat is occurring through these parts of the world and how it's playing a big factor. These are the levels of risks of species extinction. From the most dangerous one is extinct, never we come back to life, to vulnerable, where we have to actually start planning an action plan for the community to support these species to keep living. Keep in mind how we define species earlier, so that will help you to understand why these species don't exist after. Then we'll look in chapter 2 where there's changing populations, and in this case we'll look at some graphs of explaining of how there's different understanding of how some populations can grow quite quickly in a certain period of time, and we're going to see maybe it's the fact that there's a big availability of resources that's causing that, and then it might decrease because of the competition in that area too. So keep in mind, exponential growth is what's showing to the right here. And is it possible for a population to grow exponentially forever? Great question for you to answer now. Now, eventually the size of a given population will reach the carrying capacity, where it will be no more, where it will actually stay stable. And this will be the point where the resources are no longer in existence or supported the amount of population that existed in that area. So now all populations demonstrate this type of growth, and we also call this as the S-curve on this graph. And a prime example here, we're seeing what about the human population? Our growth has increased dramatically in the last, looks like 70 years to 80 years now, where it's going from more than 6.7 million people. So we're already almost at 8. So what about the human population? We'll keep going like in this actually exponential growth. How has our species managed to retain exponential growth for such a long period of time? Because as you realize, you're seeing that this big growth has occurred a while back, since the Black Death, the plague. So, can this type of growth be sustained? Can we keep growing and growing and growing? That's one question that we have to ask ourselves, and we'll look more into it. Okay, variation in survival. Keep in mind, as population growth declines, which determines which individual will survive. So we'll see, well, how are these species surviving through different variations of life adaptations and so forth. And individuals with variations that are better suited to their particular environment is also known as the survival of the fittest. So they figure out a way to survive through the environment conditions that they're in. So this is why these are examples of adaptations, where there's camouflaging occurring to this, looks like some kind of snake of some sort on the right-hand picture, where a giraffe was the first giraffes that were on Earth never had a big long neck, but they needed to because over time they evolved themselves to have these long necks to actually get the leaves at the top. Owls, keep in mind for them, they also had to adapt to the living standards from being nocturnal compared to day hunters because of the other predators were quicker for them to actually grab their prey. For example, an eagle or hawk was more successful to do it during the day, so the owl decided to actually hunt at night when they're actually sleeping. A polar bear, because of the color of their fur and so forth, would be an example of their adaptation and how thick it is and so forth to actually stay warm. So, variation population change also it does occur over time, and we'll look at more about how that happens and how they could pass their genes on to offsprings. This is a topic of natural selection. We'll look at how Darwin made this topic and so forth. Over multiple generations, this can lead to changes in the characteristics, and with more individuals possessing favorable variations. This process is called natural selection, as I was mentioning. This leaves us to the end of this topic and course, that is, and we'll end with a prayer. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, thank you for all the opportunity to learn more about biology concepts and so forth, especially this biospheres and how ecosystems work and how we could actually sustain our life on Earth, knowing how we should be in human population growing and how extinction does occur, so we have to work together to make that work. And at this time, there's any intentions, to bring them up. Amen, Lord. So, have a great term here, guys, and any questions, do not hesitate to reach out.